I never thought I'd hear the words that would break me more than anything else in my life. My own son, the boy I raised with every ounce of my strength, looked straight into my eyes one evening and said coldly, "Dad, you're nothing but a failure." At first I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but the disgust in his voice, the smirk on his lips, and the way he turned his back on me burned into my soul. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my head, like a curse. I stared at the ceiling, wondering, was he right? Had I really failed at everything? I had worked jobs here and there, always struggling to make ends meet. Life had never been easy, but I did everything for him, for my family. I sacrificed my dreams so he could go to school, so he could eat better than I ever did, so he wouldn't know the kind of hunger I grew up with. Yet, none of that mattered now. In his eyes, I was just a failure. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. Wrinkles of stress, tired eyes, and hands that had worked too many meaningless jobs. But behind all that, there was still a fire, a spark I thought had died years ago. If my son wanted to call me a failure, I was going to prove him wrong. Not just to him, but to myself. That's when the idea hit me, a hit. For years, people had told me, "You make the best coffee, you should open your own cafe." I had brushed it off, telling myself I wasn't good enough. I didn't have the money, I didn't have the courage. But now I had nothing to lose. His insult became the fuel I never knew I needed. I started small. I sold the few valuables I had left, borrowed some money from an old friend, and rented a tiny corner shop on the edge of town. It was run down with peeling paint, broken tiles, and an old counter that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Most people would have laughed at the idea of turning that wreck into a cafe, but as I stood there in that empty space, I didn't see ruins. I saw the future. Of course, when my son found out, he laughed in my face. "A cafe? Seriously? You can't even keep a regular job and now you think you can run a business? Dad, this is embarrassing." His words stung, but I stayed silent, because deep down I knew I wasn't doing this for him anymore. I was doing this for me. The first week was hell. I painted the walls myself, scrubbed the floors until my hands bled, and fixed up old furniture I bought second-hand. I worked day and night, barely sleeping, surviving on the very coffee I was planning to sell. Neighbors passed by and shook their heads. Some even mocked me, whispering, "He's too old for this, he won't last a month." But every insult, every doubt, every laugh behind my back, it only made me stronger. By the time the sign "Second Chances Café" went up, I wasn't just opening a shop. I was rewriting my story, and deep down I had no idea just how much this decision would change not only my life, but also my son's. The first morning I opened the doors of Second Chances Café, I stood behind the counter with trembling hands. I'd spent weeks preparing everything. The smell of freshly ground coffee filled the air, the pastries I had baked sat neatly in the display case, and the little sign outside read, "Open." But as the hours passed, not a single customer walked in. I sat there wiping the same counter again and again, my heart sinking deeper with every tick of the clock. I could almost hear my son's mocking voice in my head. "See? No one's going to waste their time here." By lunchtime, I was ready to close up when the bell above the door finally chimed. A middle-aged woman walked in, looking around curiously. My heart pounded as I greeted her. "Welcome to Second Chances Café," I said, my voice shaking. She smiled politely and ordered a cup of coffee. I poured it carefully, praying she'd like it. The moment she took a sip, her eyes widened. "This is really good," she said. "Better than what I usually get downtown." My chest swelled with pride. She left with a smile and came back the next day, this time bringing her friend. Word spread slowly. A construction worker from the site nearby stopped in, then returned the next morning with two of his co-workers. A group of students from the local college discovered my cafe and soon made it their daily study spot. Day by day, the empty chairs began to fill, and the silence was replaced with the hum of conversations and laughter. But it wasn't easy. There were still days when I barely made enough to cover the cost of supplies, nights when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. And always in the back of my mind, my son's words echoed like a curse. One evening, exhausted from cleaning up after a long day, I sat alone in the cafe, staring at the little chalkboard where I wrote the daily specials. My hands were raw, my back ached, and I could feel the weight of every sacrifice pressing down on me. That's when an old man walked in. He introduced himself as Mr. Clark, a retired business owner who lived nearby. "I've been watching your cafe," he said. "You've built something from nothing, and that takes guts. Your coffee reminds me of Europe." I laughed nervously, but he wasn't joking. He handed me his card and said, "If you ever need advice, come see me. You've got potential here, don't waste it." That night I went home and looked at the card for hours. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't chasing a foolish dream after all. Meanwhile, my son wanted nothing to do with me. When I invited him to stop by, he sneered, "Dad, I don't have time to hang out in your sad little shop." It hurt, but I didn't argue, because deep down I knew the tides were slowly turning. What I didn't know was that soon fate was going to deliver me the kind of victory no amount of money could buy. And it would come in the most unexpected way, through the very son who once called me a failure. Within a month, the cafe started to change my life. The once empty chairs now had people laughing, sipping coffee, sharing stories. The aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted beans became a magnet, drawing in regulars who soon felt more like family than customers. I noticed something strange. People didn't just come for the coffee. They came for the atmosphere, the warmth, the way I greeted each person as if they mattered. For years I had been invisible, just another tired old man working meaningless jobs. But here people saw me, they valued me. Every night as I locked up, I felt a pride I hadn't felt in decades. The cafe wasn't just surviving, it was becoming a part of the community. But my son, he still refused to acknowledge me. Sometimes he would drive past the cafe, pretending not to notice, his expensive car gliding by like a reminder of how different our worlds had become. He had a corporate job in the city, big paychecks, fancy clothes, and the arrogance to match. To him, my little cafe was laughable. Still, I kept working. I woke before dawn, kneaded dough until my arms ached, brewed pot after pot of coffee, and smiled through the exhaustion. People started leaving reviews online, glowing ones. Hidden gem, they called it. Better than Starbucks. My heart swelled with every word. One afternoon, a young couple sat by the window, whispering about their upcoming wedding. They told me how they couldn't afford a big venue, so they were planning something simple. Without thinking, I offered, "Why not hold it here? The cafe is yours for the evening, free of charge." Their eyes filled with tears. That night, the cafe was filled with fairy lights, flowers, music, and laughter. It was the most beautiful night of my life, and for the first time I realized this wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a place where second chances truly happened, but success didn't come without shadows. One evening, as I was closing, I heard a familiar voice outside, my son, talking loudly on his phone, frustrated. "No, I can't cover that payment." "Right now, stop calling me, I'll figure it out." My heart sank. Was he struggling? The same son who had called me a failure, now sounding desperate. I wanted to reach out, but before I could, he sped away. That night I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt pity. Another part felt anger. I had built something from nothing, while he, with all his opportunities, was crumbling. And I couldn't shake. The thought, karma has a strange way of working. What I didn't know then was that the cracks in his perfect life were about to shatter completely. And when they did, he would have no one else to turn to, except the failure he once abandoned. The cafe was finally becoming everything I had dreamed of. On weekends, it was packed. Students with laptops, mothers with kids, old friends reconnecting over coffee. People started calling it the heart of the neighborhood. I should have been happy, and I was, but somewhere deep inside, my son's absence gnawed at me. Every time the doorbell rang, I half expected it to be him. Every time I looked up from the counter, I hoped to see his face, but he never came. Then, one late evening, as I was sweeping the floor, I noticed someone standing outside the glass door. The streetlight cast a shadow, but I knew that silhouette. My son. For a moment my heart leapt. Was he finally here to see what I had built? But when he stepped inside, I realized this wasn't pride on his face. It was desperation. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he sat down at a corner table. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, I need your help." I froze, the broom slipping from my hands. This was the same son who once called me a failure, the same son who laughed at my dreams. And now here he was, broken, vulnerable, begging. He didn't look like the confident young man in a suit anymore. He looked like a lost boy. "I messed up," he whispered. "I thought I had everything under control, but I don't. My job's gone. My debts are piling up, and I don't know where else to go." For a moment I didn't know what to feel. Anger, satisfaction, pity, all the nights of humiliation, all the times he had turned his back on me. It all came flooding back. Karma had finally caught up to him. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him, my mind racing. The cafe was silent, the smell of fresh coffee lingering in the air. I stared at the son who once broke me, now looking like a shattered man, and in that silence I realized this was only the beginning. What happened next would not only test me as a father, but also decide whether I truly believed in second chances, or if some betrayals are too deep to ever forgive. My son sat there, his hands gripping the coffee cup so tightly I thought it might crack. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. For years, he had carried himself with pride, head high, voice sharp. Now, all that was gone. He was trembling. "Dad," he said again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what to do anymore." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Part of me wanted to comfort him immediately, but another part, the hurt father who had been called a failure, wanted answers. "What happened?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. He sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. "It started with the job. The company downsized and I was one of the first to go. I thought I'd find something new quickly, but months went by and nothing. Then came the bills, rent, car payments, everything. I tried to keep up, but the money just wasn't there." I listened silently, every word pulling me in two directions. On one hand, he was still my son, still the boy I had raised. On the other, I remembered the sting of his words. "Dad, you're a failure," he continued, his eyes darting nervously. "So I borrowed money, a lot of it, from people I shouldn't have. I thought I could pay them back once I got another job, but things just kept getting worse. Now they're threatening me. If I don't pay them soon..." He trailed off, his voice breaking. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just about money. This was dangerous. I stared at him, torn between rage and sorrow. "You had everything," I finally said, my voice low. "Education, opportunities, a good job. And still, you threw it away." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, I saw my son not as the arrogant young man who looked down on me, but as a scared child. "I know," he whispered. "I was wrong. About everything. About you. About life. I thought I was better than you, but I'm not. I need your help, Dad, please." The cafe was silent around us. Outside, the city moved on. Cars rushing by, people laughing on the sidewalks, oblivious to the storm brewing in this tiny shop. I wanted to scream at him, to remind him of every cruel word he had ever thrown at me. But another part of me, the father who had once carried him on my shoulders, the father who had stayed up all night when he was sick, ached to reach across the table and tell him it would be okay. But this wasn't a simple decision. Helping him meant risking everything I had built. Refusing him meant turning my back on my own blood, and as he looked at me with desperation in his eyes, I realized this was the hardest decision of my life. I sat there in silence, staring at my son. My mind was a storm. Memories, anger, and guilt all colliding. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts just to put food on the table, only to be called a failure years later. I remembered the sting in my chest when he laughed at my cafe idea, dismissing me like I was nothing. And yet, here he was, looking at me with the same eyes that once sparkled with innocence when he was a child, the same eyes that used to light. How when I came home with a small toy, or when I cheered for him at his school events, he was my son, my blood. But the father in me wasn't the only voice speaking. The man who had been humiliated, abandoned, and ridiculed by his own child wanted justice, wanted him to feel the weight of his choices. He broke the silence. I know what I said to you before about being a failure. I regret it more than anything, but please, please, Dad, don't turn your back on me now. I don't have anyone else. I clenched my fists beneath the table. My heart was torn in half. If I helped him, I risked everything I had built, the cafe, my stability, the small pride I had finally regained. If I refused, I risked losing him forever. I stood up and walked toward the counter, needing space to think. My son sat quietly, his head bowed, as if he already knew what I might say. I busied myself by wiping an already clean mug, my mind racing. This cafe wasn't just a business. It was my rebirth, my second chance. Was I ready to sacrifice that for someone who had nearly destroyed me with his words? But then another thought entered my mind. What good was a second chance if I wasn't willing to extend one to my own son? I sighed heavily, leaning against the counter. Do you even understand what you're asking from me? I asked finally. He lifted his head, his voice raw. Yes, I'm asking you for forgiveness and for help. I don't deserve it, I know, but I don't know where else to go. The room was thick with silence. I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of his shallow breathing. Every second felt like a lifetime. Slowly, I walked back to the table and sat down across from him again. His eyes followed me, searching for hope. I built this cafe because you called me a failure, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. Every insult, every doubt, you lit a fire in me, and now here you are sitting in the very place you said would never succeed. He swallowed hard, guilt flashing across his face. So tell me, I continued, leaning in closer, why should I risk everything I've fought for? Just to save the son who turned his back on me? His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Only tears filled his eyes, and in that moment, I realized the real battle wasn't between me and him. It was between the father I used to be and the man I had become. I watched my son's tears roll down his cheeks, and for a moment my chest tightened. A father's instinct is to protect no matter what. But then my mind replayed the cruel words he had spat at me just months ago. You're nothing but a failure. You'll never succeed. Those words had cut me deeper than any blade. They had driven me into sleepless nights, into doubt, into questioning my very existence. And yet those same words had also forged the fire that built this cafe. Every brick, every cup of coffee, every smiling customer, it all stood as proof that I wasn't the man he had labeled me to be. My son wiped his face with his sleeve and whispered, Dad, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I promise you, if you help me now, I'll never let you down again. I narrowed my eyes. Promises. I'd heard them before. From friends, from business partners, even from family. Most of them turned to ash. You don't understand, I said firmly. This cafe isn't just a building, it's my redemption. It's the life I rebuilt after being torn down, even by you. And now you're asking me to gamble it all for. You? For someone who didn't believe in me when I needed it the most. His voice cracked. I was stupid, I was arrogant. I thought I knew everything. But now I've lost everything, and I realize you were the only one who truly cared about me. The silence after his words was suffocating. My hands trembled slightly as I took a sip of coffee, trying to mask the storm brewing inside me. But then something strange happened. One of my regular customers, Mrs. Anderson, quietly approached the counter to pay for her tea. She glanced at me, then at my son, and softly said, Don't let pride steal your family, dear. You'll regret it when it's too late. Her words struck me like lightning. She didn't know the full story, but somehow she saw the battlefield in my heart. After she left, I turned back to my son. He was staring at the floor, broken, humiliated. For the first time, I noticed how thin he had become, how tired his face looked. This wasn't the confident young man who once mocked me. This was someone drowning, reaching out for a lifeline. And then, just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed on the table. A message appeared from an unknown number. "If you care about your son, stay away. He's already made his bed." My heart skipped a beat. I looked at my son sharply, but he avoided my gaze. My stomach turned cold. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded. He froze. His silence spoke louder than words, and in that moment, I realized the problem wasn't just between us. There was something darker, something far more dangerous lurking in the shadows. My son's silence screamed louder than any confession. His shoulders tensed, his lips trembled, and his eyes darted everywhere except toward me. That message wasn't some random prank. Someone out there knew about him, knew enough to threaten me. "Who sent this?" I asked, my voice sharp. He swallowed hard but said nothing. I slammed the phone down on the table. The sound echoed through the cafe, and a few customers turned their heads. "Enough lies," I hissed, lowering my voice. "What have you gotten yourself into?" Finally he broke. His words came out shaky, rushed, desperate. "Dad, I owe money, a lot of money. I thought I could fix it, but it spiraled out of control, and now they're after me. If I don't pay, they'll—" His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. I leaned back, stunned. My son, the same boy who once mocked me for failing, had now fallen into a pit even deeper than mine. But this wasn't about business pride anymore. This was about survival. "How much?" I asked. He whispered the number and my stomach dropped. It was more than I had earned from the cafe in 6 months. Rage burned inside me. Not because of the debt, but because of his arrogance, his recklessness, his utter blindness to the dangers he had invited into his life. And now he wanted me to pay the price? "Dad, please," he whispered again, tears streaming. "You're the only one who can save me." I clenched my fists, torn between fury and pity. My cafe had just started thriving. Customers trusted me. For the first time in years, I felt respected. But if I stepped into his mess, I risked losing everything all over again. Then the cafe. Doors suddenly swung open. 2 men in dark jackets entered, scanning the room. Their eyes landed on my son. He went pale instantly. "They're here," he muttered. My pulse raced. The men walked closer, casual but intimidating, like wolves circling their prey. One of them smirked at me as if he already knew who I was. "Nice place you got here," he said coldly. "Shame if something happened to it." I felt every eye in the cafe on us, the air thick with dread. My son buried his face in his hands, whispering apologies under his breath. I straightened my back, staring directly into the man's eyes. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady. "This cafe is my life. If you think you can threaten me here in front of my customers, in front of my family, you've made a mistake." The man chuckled, unfazed. "We'll see about that. You've got 48 hours to settle his debt, or else both your son and this little dream of yours disappear." They turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. My son sobbed into his hands, broken beyond repair. I stood, frozen, staring at the door. My cafe, my redemption, my son's life, they had all just been thrown into the hands of strangers who played by no rules. For the first time since opening this cafe, I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. The battle wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about survival, and I wasn't going down without a fight. That night, I couldn't sleep. The men's words echoed in my head like a curse. 48 hours, or everything disappears. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the cafe's neon sign faintly glowing through the window. My son had fallen asleep, on the couch, exhausted from crying. For the first time in years, I saw him not as the arrogant boy who mocked me, but as a frightened child again. Still, his mistakes had pulled me into a storm I never asked for. I walked into the cafe's kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee lingering from the day's work. Every corner of this place carried a piece of my soul. The counters I polished, the recipes I perfected, the loyal customers who trusted me. All of it was mine, built from the ashes of failure. And now it was at risk because of him. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Anger surged through me, but so did determination. If they thought they could scare me into submission, they had underestimated the wrong man. The next morning, I opened the cafe as usual. My regulars arrived, smiling, chatting, unaware of the storm brewing behind the counter. I forced a smile, greeting them warmly, but inside I was a volcano ready to erupt. Around noon, I noticed something unusual. A sleek black car was parked across the street. Inside, 2 men sat watching. They didn't order coffee, didn't move, just sat there. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a debt collection anymore. This was surveillance. My son sat at a corner table, his head buried in his hands. He looked broken, fragile, nothing like the proud boy who once called me a failure. And yet, he had dragged me into this. At that moment, a customer, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Harris approached me. "You look troubled, dear. Is everything all right?" I forced another smile. "Just tired, Mrs. Harris. Long night." But deep inside, I wanted to scream. As the day dragged on, the pressure mounted. Every time the bell over the cafe door jingled, I expected those men to walk back in. Every sip of coffee I served tasted like fear. Every glance at the clock reminded me 47 hours left. That night, I sat with my son again. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "We can't hide from this. Tell me everything. Who are these men? What exactly did you do?" Tears welled in his eyes. "Dad, I borrowed money from them to invest in a business. I thought I'd prove you wrong. I thought I could show you I wasn't a disappointment, but I lost it all, and now they want blood." My heart sank. The irony was cruel. He had tried to prove himself by chasing shortcuts, while I rebuilt myself brick by brick. And now he was learning the lesson the hard way. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Son, this isn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. This is about survival, and if they want to fight," my voice hardened, "then they'll get one." The next morning, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a friend from my past, a man who understood debt, betrayal, and how to fight back. As the phone rang, I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just about my cafe anymore. It was war. The phone call ended with just 3 words: "Meet me tomorrow." I didn't sleep much that night. My son paced the living room like a caged animal, muttering apologies, breaking down every few minutes. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I knew exactly who I was going to see, and I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 20 years. The next morning, I left the cafe in my son's hands. "Don't open the register," I warned. "Don't talk to anyone suspicious. Just serve the coffee and keep your head down." His eyes widened, but he nodded, desperate to make things right. I drove to the outskirts of town, down a cracked road that led to an old mechanic's garage. It looked abandoned from the outside, but the moment I stepped in, the smell of grease, metal, and old cigarettes hit me. And there he was, James O'Connor. James was an old friend from my younger days, back when life was rougher, and I wasn't just a dreamer with a coffee pot. We'd been through scraps together, survived nights we should never have walked out. Verve, he looked older now, grey beard, tired eyes, but still sharp, still dangerous. "Well, well," James said, tossing a wrench onto the counter. "If it isn't Mr. Cafe owner. Heard you've been living the quiet life, so why the sudden call?" I told him everything, the men, the debt, the threats, the surveillance car. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back and lit a cigarette. "You've got 48 hours, huh? Then we don't have time to waste," he said. "These aren't just loan sharks, they're organized. And if they've shown up already, they're not bluffing." My stomach turned, but I stayed firm. "What do I do?" James smirked. "What we do. You're not alone in this, old friend." For the next 2 hours, we laid out a plan. James knew people, contacts in the police, a private investigator who owed him a favor, even a guy who specialized in tracing hidden money. "First step," he said, "we need to find out why they're so eager to take your cafe. Is it just about your son's debt, or is there something bigger?" I frowned. "Something bigger?" He nodded. "Your cafe's location. It's prime real estate. If they push you out, they're not just collecting debt, they're investing. Your son's stupidity was just the bait. The idea chilled me. Could it be true? Was this cafe, the place I'd built with my own hands, just a target for some criminal expansion? James slammed his fist on the table. We're going to expose them. We gather proof, get the police involved, and when they come knocking again, you'll be ready. I drove back that evening with fire in my chest. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt hope. Not because the danger was gone, but because I wasn't fighting alone anymore. When I walked into the cafe, my son looked up nervously. "Dad, where were you?" I stared at him, my voice steady. "Preparing. If those men think they can take what's mine, they're about to learn who they're dealing with." In the reflection of the cafe's window, I saw the black car still parked across the street, watching, waiting. But now I was watching back. The next morning, James showed up at the cafe. He wore a leather jacket, his sharp eyes scanning every corner before he sat down at the counter. My son froze when he saw him. James gave him a nod but didn't waste time on introductions. "First things first," James said, leaning close. "I had my guy dig around. Those men, they work for a syndicate, not just debt collectors. They're into real estate laundering. They grab struggling businesses, force owners out, and then flip the property through shell companies. Your cafe, my friend, is sitting on gold." My jaw clenched. It all made sense now, their threats, the surveillance, the urgency. They didn't just want money back, they wanted everything. James tapped the counter. "We're going to need evidence, paper trails, recordings, anything. If we go to the cops without proof, they'll laugh us out of the station, or worse, tip off the syndicate." That night, while my son wiped tables, James and I set up a tiny recorder under the counter. The plan was simple: bait them into revealing their real intentions, and sure enough, the opportunity came faster than expected. Two of the men walked in just before closing time. Their presence chilled the air instantly. One leaned casually against the counter while the other smirked at me. "Time's running out," he said. "You don't want this place turning into someone else's dream, do you?" My heart pounded, but I forced a calm smile. "I just need more time. Business is good. I'll pay. Just give me a chance." The man chuckled darkly. "We're not interested in your coffee, old man. We're interested in this property. In 2 days, this cafe belongs to us, whether you're still standing in it or not." I clenched my fists. Under the counter, as the recorder blinked silently, capturing every word. When they finally left, James exhaled. "We got it. Exactly what we need." But the night wasn't over. As I locked up, my son stopped me. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Dad, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you." My blood ran cold. "What is it?" He swallowed hard. "When I borrowed the money, I didn't just sign my name. I used the cafe's paperwork, too. They already have documents tying this place to their claim. They can legally take it if we don't fight." "Pack?" For a moment, the walls of the cafe seemed to close in. I had fought so hard to rebuild my life, only to realize my son had handed the keys to the wolves himself. James cursed under his breath. "You should have told us earlier, kid." My son broke down, tears streaming. "I thought I could fix it before you found out. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I stood there in silence, torn between fury and heartbreak. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a fight for my dream anymore. It was a fight for survival and for redemption. James placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Good thing we're one step ahead. Let them come. Next time we'll be ready." Outside, the black car's headlights flicked on, glaring like the eyes of a predator. The clock was ticking. The cafe felt different after that night. The laughter of customers, the smell of fresh pastries, the cozy warmth. It all seemed like a fragile disguise over a battlefield. Every time the bell over the door rang, my chest tightened. Would it be another customer, or the men coming back to collect? James kept watch like a hawk. He sat at a corner table every morning, sipping his black coffee, his eyes never leaving the windows. My son stayed quiet, working in the background, trying to prove he wasn't the same reckless boy who had nearly destroyed everything. But the guilt weighed on him like chains. By noon, James's contact from the police slipped into the cafe. A plainclothes detective named Carter. He carried himself like a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. He slid into a booth and lowered his voice. "You're lucky you caught this on tape," Carter said after hearing the recording. "But it's not enough. These guys know how to twist the law. If we move too early, the case won't stick. We need to catch them red-handed." James grinned. "Then we bait the trap." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You're playing with fire. These men won't hesitate to spill blood." I felt the weight of his warning, but I had already decided. No, more running, no more fear. If it means saving my cafe, I'll take the risk. That evening, as the cafe emptied, my son approached me. His voice cracked. "Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but let me help. Please, don't shut me out." I studied him carefully. The same son who once mocked me was now begging to stand by my side. Maybe it was too late for apologies, but not too late for redemption. I nodded. "Then prove it. Be here when it counts." Just as we were closing, the black car outside moved for the first time. It pulled up directly in front of the cafe, its headlights flooding the windows with blinding light. The door swung open, and 3 men stepped out. Not 2, 3. James's hand instinctively went to his jacket, where I knew he kept a piece of insurance. My son stiffened, his hands trembling but his jaw set. The men walked in like they owned the place. One of them, the leader, smirked at me. "Time's up, old man. We don't negotiate anymore. You either hand this place over, or we take it, by force." The cafe went dead silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. I straightened my back, refusing to show fear. This cafe isn't for sale, and it never will be. The leader's grin widened, cruel and cold. Then, "You've made your last mistake." Before I could respond, James leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. "Careful what you say, because every word you speak right now is being recorded." The men froze. Their eyes darted around the cafe, suddenly aware of the tiny blinking light beneath the counter. The leader's smirk faded. His expression hardened into rage. "You think you can outsmart us? You're dead." But before anything could happen, the sound of sirens cut through the night air. Red and blue lights flashed outside the cafe windows. The men exchanged panicked glances. The trap had been sprung, and yet something in my gut told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the quiet street until red and blue lights washed over the cafe's windows. For a moment, I thought it was over, that justice had finally arrived. But when the police cars stopped, only 2 officers stepped out, their faces tense, their hands resting on their holsters. The syndicate men didn't flinch. In fact, the leader smirked. "You really think a couple of uniforms can stop us? You don't know who you're dealing with, old man." I looked at James, whose jaw tightened. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't relax. These guys have influence. Cops can be bought." The officers entered, one hand raised in a placating gesture. "Evening, gentlemen. We've had a report of a disturbance." James cut in quickly. "These men just threatened to take this business by force. We've got it recorded. You'll want to hear it." He gestured subtly toward the hidden recorder under the counter. The leader chuckled, stepping forward. "That recording? Worthless. You think some cheap gadget will stand in court? I've got paperwork that says this cafe is ours. Signed. Legal. My..." Son went pale. His mistake, the forged paperwork, was coming back like a blade to the throat. But before the officers could respond, James slammed his hand on the counter. "Listen closely. That tape isn't the only evidence. We've been digging. We know about your shell companies. We know about the other businesses you've stolen. You think this is about coffee? No, this is about every crime you've buried under fake leases and contracts." The leader's smile faltered for the first time. His eyes narrowed at James. "You've made a very dangerous enemy." The tension thickened, the cafe air heavy with fear. My son's breath shook beside me, but for once he didn't back down. He stood straighter, fists clenched, staring at the men who had cornered him. One officer stepped forward. "We'll need all of you to come down to the station." But before he could finish, the leader snapped his fingers. The third man, the A, one who had stayed quiet, reached into his jacket. My heart stopped. James moved faster than I thought possible. In one swift motion, he grabbed the man's wrist and slammed it against the counter, the weapon clattering to the floor. "Not in my friend's cafe," James growled. The officers shouted, drawing their weapons. Chaos erupted. Shouts, heavy footsteps, the screech of chairs scraping across the floor. Customers who had lingered screamed and rushed out, the bell above the door jingling wildly. In the middle of it all, I stood frozen. The cafe I had built with my own hands turned into a battlefield. And yet, something inside me snapped into clarity. This was my place, my life, my fight. I grabbed the recorder from under the counter and slammed it on the table in front of the officers. "Everything you need is right here. You either take them now or you let this entire town fall into their hands." The room went dead silent for half a heartbeat. The officers looked at each other. Then, slowly, they turned their weapons toward the syndicate men. For the first time that night, it felt like the tide was turning. But deep down, I knew men like this didn't go down without pulling others into the fire. The officers leveled, their guns at the syndicate men, tension stretching so sharp you could almost hear it crack in the air. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked. The leader slowly raised his hands, but his grin returned. "Careful, gentlemen. You don't know how many strings I can pull. Arrest me and tomorrow morning you'll be unemployed or worse." His words made the officers hesitate. Their grips trembled, their eyes darting nervously between each other. James noticed it instantly. He muttered under his breath, "See? Bought cops, we can't rely on them." Before I could respond, the second officer lowered his weapon slightly. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" James growled. The officer looked almost guilty but shook his head. "Orders from above. This man, he's protected, we can't touch him." The betrayal hit like ice water down my spine. The very people sworn to protect us were bowing to the criminals destroying lives. The syndicate leader laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. He stepped closer, his confidence flooding back. "See? I told you. This is my city, my rules." He leaned in toward me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "And soon your little cafe will have my name on it." Rage burned through me, hotter than fear. I slammed my fist on the counter. "Not while I'm still breathing." The customers who hadn't fled gasped. Even my son looked at me with wide eyes, surprised at my sudden outburst. The leader's smirk vanished. His hand twitched like he was about to strike me, but before he could, James moved, shoving him back with such force that the man stumbled into a table, sending cups crashing to the floor. The quiet officer suddenly snapped out of his hesitation, raising his weapon again. "Stop right there, everyone stay where they are," but it was too late. The quiet syndicate man, the one whose gun James had knocked away earlier, lunged forward and grabbed my son by the collar. With a single, brutal motion, he pressed a knife against his throat. The cafe froze. Every sound, sirens outside, the hum of the coffee machine, even my own heartbeat, felt muted. "Now," the man hissed, "if anyone moves, the kid bleeds." My son's terrified eyes locked with mine. For all his arrogance, all his mistakes, he was still my child. I felt every fiber of my being scream to tear that blade away from his neck. The leader straightened his jacket, regaining composure. "You, say, you can't win against me. You'll hand over this cafe or you'll watch him die right here." The officers didn't move. James looked at me, his face set with grim determination. Then he whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't give in, he's bluffing, we can outsmart them." But could we? One wrong move and I'd lose my son forever. The syndicate leader's voice dripped with venom. "Choose, old man. Your cafe or your bloodline." And in that moment I realized something chilling. This wasn't about business anymore. This was war. The cafe felt like a tomb, silence broken only by my son's ragged breathing as the blade pressed closer to his throat. One wrong twitch and it would all be over. "Hand it over," the syndicate leader demanded, slamming a contract. Onto the counter. His cold eyes bored into mine. "Sign the papers and maybe your son walks out alive." I clenched my fists. My dream cafe, the symbol of every ounce of dignity I had left, was about to be ripped away. But worse, if I signed, I'd be showing my son that corruption wins, that giving in is the only way to survive. James leaned slightly toward me, whispering through barely parted lips. Stall him. Trust me. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. I'll sign, just let him breathe. The leader smirked. Smart man, bring him the pen. The thug with the knife shoved my son forward, never loosening his grip. My boy's eyes brimmed with tears, but beneath the fear I saw something else. Regret. For the first time, he understood what his arrogance had cost us. As I reached for the pen, James suddenly knocked over a steaming cup of coffee. It splattered across the floor, the hiss of hot liquid startling everyone for a split second. In that tiny sliver of distraction, James kicked the fallen gun across the floor, straight toward me. My heart pounded. I didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, I scooped up the weapon and aimed it at the thug holding my son. "Drop the knife," I roared. My voice was louder than I thought possible, every ounce of a father's fury burning in it. The thug faltered, but the leader snarled. "Don't listen to him, cut the boy now." The blade nicked my son's skin. A tiny red line appeared, and my world tunneled into rage. "Don't you dare," I barked, my finger tightening on the trigger. "If he bleeds, you're done. I don't care what protection you think you have. You'll die right here in this cafe." For the first time I saw hesitation in the leader's eyes. His mask of power cracked, if only for a moment. James seized it. "You're surrounded. Cops outside, angry witnesses in here, and now a father with nothing to lose. You've already lost." The customers, silent until now, began murmuring, voices rising like a tide. Phones were recording. Live streams were already buzzing. The syndicate's so-called shield, fear, was crumbling. The thug's hand trembled. Slowly, agonizingly. He lowered the knife. My son stumbled free, running straight into my arms. Relief flooded through me so strongly my knees almost gave way. But the leader wasn't finished, his face twisted with fury. He lunged across the counter, grabbing the contract and ripping it to shreds. "If I can't have this cafe, then nobody will." He pulled a lighter from his pocket, flicking it alive. The orange flame danced inches from the papers, from the wooden counter. Our whole world ready to burn. James cursed under his breath. "This isn't over. He's going to torch the place." The leader's laughter echoed, wild and unhinged. "Let's see how much you value your little dream when it's reduced to ashes." The flickering flame from the syndicate leader's lighter looked small, almost harmless. Yet in that moment, it held the power to destroy everything I had built. My cafe, my second chance at life, my son's faith in me. All of it dangled on the edge of fire. "Stop!" I shouted, gun still leveled at him. "Don't do this." But his smile was madness itself. "You think you've won? I'll leave you with ashes. That's all men like you deserve." Before I could react, he tossed the lighter toward the stack of contracts and wooden counter. Time seemed to slow, the tiny flame arcing through the air, heading straight for the tinderbox. James moved like lightning. He grabbed a steaming kettle of water from behind the counter and hurled it across the room. The boiling stream doused the lighter midair, extinguishing the flame with a hiss before it could ignite anything. The leader's grin vanished, replaced by shock. "No, impossible." "Not today," James growled. I surged forward, adrenaline exploding through me. My son clung to my arm, but I pushed him gently aside. This wasn't his fight, it was mine. With the gun still raised, I closed the distance between myself and the man who had threatened everything. "You wanted to see me broken," I spat, pressing the barrel against his chest. "But look around. The only broken man here is you." Phones were still recording. Customers whispered, gasped, some even cheered. The leader looked around and finally saw the truth. His reign of intimidation had collapsed in front of witnesses. Sirens wailed outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the cafe's windows. Police stormed in, weapons drawn. "Drop it," one officer barked. Slowly, with defeat etched on every line of his face, the syndicate leader raised his hands. The thugs followed suit. Within moments they were disarmed, cuffed, and dragged out of my cafe, no longer predators but prisoners. As the last of them was shoved into a squad car, the cafe erupted into applause. Customers hugged us, clapped us on the back, whispered words of support. For the first time, my dream cafe wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of resistance, of survival, of justice. James leaned against the counter, breathing hard but grinning. "Told you we'd make it." I looked at my son, who had been silent since the ordeal ended. His eyes were red, not from fear, but from guilt. "Dad," he whispered, voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I called you a failure. I thought you were weak. But today you showed me what strength really is." My throat tightened. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close. "You're my son. That's all that matters. We'll rebuild together, stronger than ever." The cafe smelled of spilled coffee and burnt paper, but to me it was the sweetest scent in the world. It wasn't just survival, it was victory. And as I stood there, surrounded by people who now saw me not as a washed-up failure, but as a fighter, I realized something. Sometimes life takes everything from you, just so you can prove you never needed their approval to begin with. Because in the end, I wasn't just a father. I wasn't just a man running a cafe. I was a man who refused to break. What would you do if your own child once called you a failure, and then came back begging for your help? Would you forgive them or let karma do its work? Tell me in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss more shocking family revenge stories.